Hi everybody, today we are working on the 2002 Ford E350 7.3 Powerstroke turbo diesel van. I believe it has a cracked injector nozzle. First thing we're going to do is show the symptoms of a cracked injector nozzle. We're going to start by firing it up. Now, before we do that, we need to pull the doghouse off. Okay, now we have the doghouse off, we have the engine exposed, we have the turbo there. Most importantly, we have up pipes there and there. Now, because of the HEUI, that is hydraulic electronic unit injection, is how this engine works. So what that means is it uses high pressure engine oil as a hydraulic fluid effectively to create injection pressure that is controlled electronically. What that means is that the injector has both a high pressure oil side as well as a fuel side. The fuel comes in about between 60 and 100 psi. I suspect I may not be getting the full 60 psi of fuel. Low fuel pressure does lead to cracked injector nozzles. These injectors are not even a year old, so they should not be cracking from age. I have not run it out of fuel, which is another way that you end up with cracked injector nozzles with this engine. So I'm going to fire it up. We are looking for oil. Now we can see some coming out, some evidence of oil or fuel coming out of the exhaust here. That might be indicative of a leak on the passenger side. So what I'm going to do is fire it up. It's going to be painfully loud. You can see we've got a bit of oil and fuel leaked down here. So we'll fire it up. It's going to smoke like crazy. It's going to knock like crazy. That knocking sounds like a rod knock. I don't believe this engine has a rod knock, but can't rule that out for sure. But we're going to start by looking for evidence of bad injectors. Also, we will probably replace, or at least pull out and have rebuilt the injectors, hopefully only on one side of the engine. That is, if we can determine, as I said, where the fuel is getting dumped through. What happens with a cracked injector nozzle, you end up really overfueling whichever cylinder that is. So we should see evidence of fuel in the exhaust. The exhaust smoke will be thick and gray or white, grayish white, and that will actually almost turn to liquid on contact with a surface. So without further ado, we will fire it up. Now I have a push button starter here, so we're waiting for our wait to start light right there to go off. I haven't fired this thing up in about 6 months, so hopefully it starts. Here we go. So we've got a bit of an exhaust leak right here, it looks like. You can see oil pouring out right there. So that's all bad for sure. Now, most importantly, it seems to be limited to the passenger side. You see the driver's side's looking pretty clean there, and it's really dumping out that passenger side. So I don't really want to run it too long this way. You can see the smoke billowing out in the mirrors, coming out thick and gray. So we don't want to run it too long that way. So we are going to shut it off. Apologize to the neighbors. We have our culprit here. Definitely appears to be the passenger side. Some of you may have noticed push button starter. I had something go wrong in the steering column a long time ago, and basically I think it was the neutral safety switch was not switching properly. So anyway, bypassed the whole cranking portion of the ignition switch, ran wires straight to the starter solenoid, took power from the fuse panel from a key on power source so that it won't crank with the key off. Doesn't really matter because it wouldn't start, but I figure why let it crank with the key off if you wouldn't want to do that anyway. Now, the injectors I mentioned are new. The reason they're new, you see I have the PHP Hydro tuner there as well. I actually switched from the split shot injectors that are factory on any 2002 Powerstroke. I switched over to single shot in the effort to get better mileage, more importantly, better power. They worked great for a long time until, well, at least a few months until I apparently cracked an injector nozzle. I know I had an O-ring in the injector go bad. So we were kind of diagnosing all of that, and all of that happened a few months ago, just kind of now getting around to it. For now, what we know is we have oil pouring out of the exhaust. We need to get that figured out. We need to pull the injectors. Most likely it's an injector O-ring that is dumping oil into the cylinder, and which is then puking it out the exhaust. So for right now, the next thing to do is going to be to pull off the passenger side valve cover right there. You can see it's pretty well buried in there. So it's not going to be fun. It isn't fun. I've already done it. Hopefully I can get it out relatively easily, and I'll show you what's under there. Injectors and glow plugs are both under there. You can kind of see right there the wiring harness for the injectors and glow plugs. So that's actually part of the valve cover gasket. Kind of a funky system, but that's what it is. We have to live with it. So anyway, without further ado, I will get going on this. Okay, as you can see here, I've removed the air filter housing, which will go right here, just to give myself a little more elbow room to pull the valve cover out. Valve cover is back in there. Of course, the camera's not focusing there, but anyway, that's it, back in there. The valve cover itself will actually come out into the passenger compartment, so I won't have to pull the whole cover out the front, just a couple bolts. Okay, so we're going to start removing the valve cover bolts here on the back side, just because it's a little easier. So for this, you will need a 1/2 inch. Oh, that's upside down. Anyway, you get the idea. 1/2 inch. So this deep socket is probably not going to do the trick for more than a couple of these. But I'm just going to go around, loosen what I can with this before I try a variety of other 1/2 inch sockets, wrenches, whatever fits. Just going to start by loosening them, making sure I get a wrench on them. And yeah, there's 3. I think that's all I can get with that. So on to a different size wrench. Okay, I have gone and grabbed a 13mm box wrench, so that is going to work for hopefully a few more of these. So again, just going through loosening right now, just trying to get a wrench on each of these bolts. So before I bore you with more wrench turning, what I'm going to want to do is, I'll actually have to pause the video for this, but you can see back in here, some of those are bolts like that. That one. Then there's that one there, and the next one ahead of it are studs. So I'm actually gonna pause the video and use my phone, which is my camera, to take a still photo of those studs so that I can remember where they go, because the studs themselves will actually end up coming out. So I'm gonna pause this, get that photo, maybe pull a few more of those out off camera, and we'll come back to the action in a minute. Okay, so I'm doing this video in multiple parts. So right now, I'm working at night, unfortunately, but some of the valve cover bolts are going to be really hard to reach from inside, or just about impossible. So if you reach right in here, right there, it's probably impossible to see on camera, but my middle finger is actually touching a valve cover bolt. So that's where you're going to want to go, right here next to the spring cup, to loosen that bolt and pull it out. There's going to be one. If I reach further left, or further to the right rather, right just kind of almost directly behind the spring, is another one. So that one's going to be really tough. It's just a matter of being patient and kind of just doing it, 1/10 of a turn at a time, or whatever it is. So yep, patience there. Once you break them loose, get your hands in there, 2 fingers. It's quite a workout. So that's the nature of the beast. Gotta love a 7.3 Powerstroke van. That is the price we pay as valve cover bolts come out from the fender well. So anyway, gonna do the rest of that off camera, and we'll catch up in a little bit. Okay, so I have gotten all the bolts off the valve cover there. kind of hard to see, and I'll tell you, it was a real struggle. Ended up jacking up the front end of the van just a little bit in order to reach in from the fender well for the one that's further forward of the two that are accessible there. So I left one last bolt here. This was already loose. Obviously, it's pretty easy to get to. So I left this one here just to kind of help hold the valve cover in place while I was getting the other ones around, the other ones out. Sometimes just having the valve cover move a little bit is enough to put enough tension on one of these that it prevents the bolt from turning easily. And sometimes you're using two fingers just kind of turning a bolt like that, right? So we want to hold the valve cover in place for the tough ones, leave this easy one for the last, and get that out of there. All right, valve cover is free. So set the camera down and slowly, carefully work that thing out of its little hiding spot there. Okay, so I've done this before, but I kind of forgot exactly what had to be done. But I'm finding that I believe I did, in fact, have to pull the downpipe off the turbo. So I'm using a 7/16 for that. That seems to be working just fine. I think this might actually be technically a 10 millimeter, but in typical 10 millimeter fashion, I can't find my 10 mil, any of them, any of the mini 10 mil wrenches and sockets that I have. Of course, I see them all the time when I don't need them, but now they're nowhere to be found. So anyway, 7/16 is doing the trick. I'm not even quite sure that is a 10 mil, but it looks like it. Most things on this engine seem to be metric. So anyway, just gonna undo this for a minute. Okay, so that I don't lose it, put that back on there. There she is. All right, well, valve cover out of the way. We now have injectors exposed. So hard to see in there kind of, but anyway, these are the tops of the injectors here. That's the solenoid. So the actual injector itself goes down quite a ways below that. So all but the number 3 up there, that would be that black one right there, all but that one will come out, but just without disassembling. That black one, you actually have to pull the solenoid off the injector. Now that one just happens to be black. I got a rebuilt set, so yours may not be different color, but just know that that's what you'll be looking for there. So next thing to do is to unplug the injectors at their electrical connections. So I'm going to do the first one to show you how it works, do the rest off camera. So you pull that little metal clip back like that, and then basically we pull the plug. Let's see, we pull this, the plug where the clip is slides that way. So we slide that down and kind of comes out. There, that's it, that's free. That is unplugged. I'm gonna go ahead and do the rest of those off camera. They're all the same. And then we'll come back for the injectors themselves. Okay, for this next part, you'll need a 5mm Allen wrench. That will be to remove, let me zoom in a little here. That'll be to remove the oil return deflector, I guess. I forget the exact name, but that's this Allen bolt right here, and it's this little aluminum piece right there. So what you're gonna do is, I'm gonna have to set the camera down, try to show you here. So basically, you obviously know how to loosen an Allen bolt at this point. Looks like this one was left probably a bit too tight by the dealership. Thank you very much. Okay, I got impatient, so using a ratchet. Same effect, you get the idea. Okay, this part's important. You want to try to get the aluminum oil diffuser, deflector, or whatever, pull it out with its bolt all at once, rather than pulling the bolt out first. So, I'm gonna get a finger in there, and then just kind of hold it all together. Very carefully weasel that thing out of there. And there we are. That's what we're looking at. So basically, that thing goes on there like that, on the injector, oriented as such there. And if I understand correctly, I may be wrong, tell me in the comments if I am, but oil comes out of the injector from the high pressure oil system into here, comes out the bottom there, down into the cylinder head, back to oil pan to start the process over. So to pull these out before we pull the injectors out, they're attached to the injector, but they have to come out in order for us to be able to get to the bolt that holds the injector in place. I may be wrong about that, but they do have to come out anyway. Yeah, so do the rest of that off camera, the rest of those, and come back for the next step. Okay, so we have all of the oil return guides there. Again, I don't know what to call them. You get the idea. So we have our injector, kind of hard to see here, but it's held on in two spots by a bolt right there and another one down there. Now that one is inaccessible. This one, luckily, is accessible. That's the only one we need to get to. We don't need to touch the other one. Those bolts actually hold a collar that is part of the injector. So what we'll do is we'll loosen this with an 8mm, and we want to use a deep 8mm, so just in order to get over the top of the injector there. So loosen that. Now this one, let's see, this one's actually going to have to come all the way out. The other one won't at all. So sorry for my shaky camera work. I'm trying to get this thing in where you can sort of see what I'm doing. This entire project definitely requires a lot of patience. This is not probably a good beginner project. I've been working on cars all my life, at least since I was in grade school, helping my dad. Got my own first truck rather, when I was 14, and I've been working on that, I guess now for the last 14 years. Sorry, more than 14 years. 19 years. I'm 33. Anyway, so I'm not saying I'm the best mechanic, I'm certainly not, but I've been doing it a while, just kind of, driveway mechanic stuff. And this whole project is not small. It's really pretty simple, but certainly on a van, it requires a lot of patience. That sometimes is a challenge for me to find within myself, you know. But anyway, we're getting there. Get the other hand in there. See if I can get that to come out. Oh, it's so close. Sorry for the bad camera work, but there is just no easy way to shoot this and do this at the same time. There's just no easy way to shoot this, period. Okay, here she comes. That bolt is out. So, put that aside. That collar is now loose. Now, you can just barely see. You see the collar, you can see it sliding up there. Slides up and down. What it'll do is, when you slide it up like that, it'll actually clear the head of that bolt up there. So, that way, we don't have to touch that bolt. Do not touch that bolt. It's already where it needs to be. So all we have to do is pop the injector out, slide the collar up as the injector comes out, and the whole thing comes out there that way. So I will shut the camera off for a second, go grab a pry bar, and show you how that goes. Okay, pry bar. So, different ways you can do this. I'm gonna go just kind of on top of the valve spring there, the valve spring keeper. You can see the injector just kind of pops loose, so push that keeper up. You want to keep that up and just kind of try to leverage this thing best we can. So I'm actually going to get the pry bar under the keeper there, and that, as you can see, it's clearing right there. There's its own little slot in that collar to clear that bolt right there. So now that's out. Injector is basically free. These injectors are quite long, so just very carefully kind of guide it out. And this one's got oil everywhere. They all will have oil everywhere. That's your injector. It's big, and you should put it in a bag right away. So I'm gonna shut the video down, go grab a bag, put that in there, and get to the rest of these. Okay, so I'm gonna just do a cursory kind of wipe down excess oil. You really don't want to get too much dirt on these. I am taking them to the injector shop to have them rebuilt, so not the end of the world if we get a little on them. Shout out to Happy Rock Coffee, my favorite coffee shop. If you're in the Portland, Oregon area, I'm in Gladstone. You can see right there at the bottom, Gladstone, Oregon. My local coffee shop, locally owned, locally roasted. It is the best coffee. It's the only coffee I drink. And most importantly right now, their bags are really kind of a nice size to fit an injector into. Coffee bag seems pretty big, but kind of funny, it actually fits quite well. So any coffee bag, of course, will do, but I just use what I have sitting around here. So right now I'm setting it down on the tip of the injector. Not really ideal, but I'm not putting a ton of weight on it. You do want to be careful of those nozzles that you don't bust them. So that's that. So basically, got the other 4 to pop out. Once I get those out, I'll take the set to the injector shop, and I'll let you know what's wrong with them. But for right now, that's how you get an injector out. I'll do the rest off camera, except number 3. I'll talk a little bit about pulling the injector solenoid off. Okay, here's the number 2 injector. Right here we may have the culprit. That O-ring is clearly damaged. Now, what's frustrating is these injectors were new about a year ago, and the van started knocking and smoking the way I showed you earlier last July. I just kind of didn't get around to doing anything with it till just before Christmas here this year. So obviously I let it sit for a while. But anyway, fact is, the van ran with brand new injectors quite well from February to June. Then it had an O-ring one of these two, I'm not sure which one, or rather one of these three, I'm not sure which one, had an O-ring fail, and that was down in California, so had it fixed down there at a dealership. I don't want to say which one. And I basically drove it home, so over 500 miles home from there. And as soon as I got it home, literally the next day, went to drive it and started knocking and smoking really bad, like a cracked injector nozzle. That can be due to low fuel pressure. Usually the injector nozzles in these will crack if you run them out of fuel. So it's possible that that's what that is. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not sure which part of the injector does which, but I do know that one of them, one part of it is the fuel side. That's probably going to be this one, if I had to guess. The other part's going to be the high pressure oil side that uses engine oil as a sort of a hydraulic fluid to create injection pressure with what's called an intensifier piston that's going to be in here. And it's going to force the fuel out the nozzle at injection pressure, which is going to be pretty high. So there's the two sides of it, the high pressure oil side and the fuel side. And I'm not sure exactly what's wrong. Like I said, I think that O-ring right there is probably my culprit for the trouble I've been having here. I will take these to an injector shop and have them tell me for sure what's going on. So with that said, without making this video too long, what we're gonna have to do on injector number 3 is pull the solenoid off. That's really just this plastic part right here, just that bit there. So need a Torx. Okay, so in order to remove the solenoid, you will need a Torx T20. And I'm not going to pull this one off, but pull these 4 bolts out. And basically this whole plastic piece right here pops off. There's not much to really worry about. Obviously we want to try to keep everything clean, but basically we pull that plastic piece off on number 3 in there, which is what will allow us, basically it effectively shortens the injector enough that you can squeeze it out past the tunnel that the engine lives in here, because of course the engine is in a tunnel in the van. If you have a truck, this is not a concern. If you have a truck, I'd say don't pull the solenoids off. If you have a van, don't pull any of the other solenoids off. But for number 3, solenoid comes off, that'll get it out. I would recommend putting the solenoid right back on as soon as the whole injector is out. And yeah, that'll be it. So I'm gonna do that off camera since you can't really see in there anyway. I can't see in there without the camera, let alone with the camera in the way. I'm gonna take the injectors to the injector shop. I will tell you what was wrong with them, what the injector shop did, and we will reinstall. Okay, so quick update here. Looking at the number 3 injector back there, I've already removed the injector solenoid, which is right here. This spacer, watch out for that, make sure you grab that. If you just pull the bolts and pull the solenoid, that spacer will fall. Mine luckily hit the ground, but you can't always count on that, so heads up for that. I was able to use a Torx socket, basically, like that, for the upper 2. For the lower 2, I had to get creative because that's actually too long. It won't fit in between the top of the injector and the firewall there, the tunnel. So what I did, just got lucky, found a Torx bit, just like a nut driver bit, and clamped that with some vice grips. That's a low enough profile. It's kind of a pain to turn a bolt with it, but really all you have to do is loosen it to the point of finger tight and then back them out by hand. Now, in order to pop the injector free with my pry bar here, what I did, you can see back here, the injector minus its solenoid, I put one of the solenoid bolts back in, and I actually pried off of the rocker arm just like that. So that, there you can see the injector's loose there. So that's how I actually pop the injector loose. Otherwise, getting the pry bar under the edge of the injector is actually really hard. There's just no room to work in there. So quick tip on pulling that number 3 injector: use a solenoid bolt, pry off the rocker arm, make sure you thread the bolt most of the way in. I threaded it all the way in, then backed out a couple turns. you want full thread engagement. You're not pulling hard on it when you pry on it, but you do want to make sure that that's fully engaged since you are only prying on one bolt there. Okay, we are back here working on the van. I've got the injectors back from the shop. Here we are. So one of the things that the guy at the shop told me, the injector shop, he said that I need to look for this copper washer. Now he stuck that on using grease, but he said that I need to make sure that I don't have one of those left over hanging out in the bottom of the injector cup. We don't want to have two of them because then the injector won't seat all the way. We also need to make sure that one of them didn't fall off in the disassembly process and get stuck in there kind of pointing the wrong way. So what I'm going to do is use a bore scope. Just went to Harbor Freight, got the cheapest one they had. It's got the same number of pixels as the most expensive one they have, so I didn't see any reason to go for the $200 one. This is not something I'm going to be using very often. So what we're going to do is, if I can get this to show up, basically going to put the camera down inside the bore. So it's kind of hard to look at here. So basically I'm looking down in there, and yeah, it's kind of hard to tell, honestly, if there's a washer down there or not. Almost looks like there could be. Obviously, you know, we got a crappy screen that we're then taking video of. So I'm gonna do the rest of the analysis there off camera. But basically, that's the next step here before installing the new injectors, is to make sure that all those O-rings are rather that there are no O-rings down in there. So I'll get that done, and then we'll get to putting the injectors back in after the rebuild. Okay, so we're using the Harbor Freight scope, and it comes with a little grabber hook, and actually, if I can set this down carefully, I was able to find an extra copper washer that goes on the tip of the injector, just basically right above the nozzle. So the injector shop told me that he found only 3 copper washers out of the 4 injectors that I brought into him to have checked out. So he told me to look in, see if I could spot another one. So got this little cheap Harbor Freight scope. Used a little grabber hook. I actually had to modify it a little bit with a pair of needle nose pliers. Not hard to do. It has a sleeve that holds it on. I used some duct tape insurance there to make sure I don't lose the hook down the cylinder, as that would obviously be really bad. So anyway, found that is most likely the source of some issue, and if it wasn't before, it certainly would have been in the future. So anyway, that was in the second cylinder I checked. So I will scope the last 2, make sure they're clear, no washers left in them, and I'll slam these injectors back in, get this thing fired up hopefully soon. All right, so I just found this little chunk of O-ring in the number 1 injector cup, so had to get really creative. I used my scope to find it. As you can see, this would be a tough piece to actually hook with the little wire hook that goes on the end of the scope. So what I did was I taped up a piece of fuel hose to my shop vac nozzle, and got creative, got a small diameter vacuum hose basically. So sometimes you need to get creative to get all the way in there. Kind of hard to see, but anyway, right down in there. It's pretty crowded. So anyway, got it out. So I now know that all my injector cups on this side, passenger side, are clean. So I am going to actually finally start putting the injectors back in. Okay, so now we're underneath the vehicle. We have all the injectors in. Don't have the valve cover on yet, just in case, but all the injectors are in, connected. And now we are turning the engine over by hand. It is a 15/16 bolt. That's a 15/16 crank bolt. And we're turning the engine clockwise, right? Yeah, clockwise. The reason is that when you pull the injectors out, the high pressure oil system then dumps a bunch of oil into the combustion chamber. And if you crank the engine over with the starter, it could potentially hydrolock a cylinder that is full of oil, and that will then bend a connecting rod, especially if the engine fires. So the common wisdom is you turn it over by hand, make sure you clear all the oil out. Ideally you do it with the glow plug removed, let the oil shoot out that way. I did not feel like touching my glow plugs, so I just decided to muscle it over under here. It's not impossible. It is kind of a pain. I used actually a torque wrench because it's the longest ratchet I have, and believe me, you want to use the longest ratchet that you have. So anyway, I watched the crank, the timing mark, which is right there. Watched it go by probably 3 or 4 times, so I know the engine's turned over a number of times. I might go another round or 2. I'm sure there's no more oil in the combustion chambers by now, but better safe than sorry. A little extra workout makes me feel better anyway, so that's what we'll do. After this, it'll be time to put the valve cover back on, and then time to light the fire. All right, here is the moment of truth. Will she fire?